Imagine opening your eyes millions of years ago. But this is not the Africa you know. There are no cities, no roads, no human voices echoing across the plains. The world around you is older, wilder, and far more dangerous. You are standing in East Africa, near the place that will one day become the Great Rift Valley, a land that will eventually reveal the story of human evolution. The ancestors of humanity will walk here. Ancient apes will climb through these forests. And millions of years later, scientists will uncover their bones buried beneath the ground. But long before humans appeared, before our ancestors learned to walk upright, this land belonged to another ruler, a creature that was not a lion, not a leopard, not a hyena, something far stranger, a predator from a lost branch of evolution, a hunter with a skull larger than anything a modern lion could imagine, a creature built around one purpose: power. Its name was Simbakubwa kutokaafrika, the great lion from Africa. But despite its name, it was not a lion. It was not even related closely to modern cats. It belonged to a completely different dynasty of predators, a dynasty that ruled the earth long before lions ever existed, the hyaenodonts. 7 million years ago, the landscape of East Africa was changing. Forests were beginning to transform. Open grasslands were expanding. New mammals were appearing. Ancient relatives of elephants moved across the land. Early primates lived among the trees. And somewhere beyond the reach of sunlight, a giant predator was moving through the shadows. You would probably hear it before you saw it. A heavy step, then another. The ground would tremble slightly beneath your feet. The animals around you would suddenly become silent, because they knew something was approaching. Then, from the edge of the forest, a massive head would appear. A powerful jaw, huge teeth, a body built for strength rather than speed. This was not a lion. It was something older, something that belonged to another chapter of Earth's history. In the 1970s, scientists searching for ancient primate fossils in Kenya made an unexpected discovery. They were looking for clues about our own origins. Instead, they found the remains of something completely different: a gigantic lower jaw. At first glance, it looked almost impossible. The bone was enormous. Its size surpassed the skull of a modern lion. It belonged to an animal unlike anything alive today. Decades later, researchers officially named this creature Simbakubwa kutokaafrika. The name came from the Swahili language. It means, Great Lion from Africa. A fitting name for an animal that looked like it belonged in a nightmare. But the truth was even more fascinating. Because this creature was not a failed version of a lion. It was something entirely separate. A different experiment of evolution. After the extinction of the dinosaurs, mammals entered a new age. The world was suddenly open. New ecosystems appeared. And mammals began evolving into countless forms. Some became giants. Some returned to the oceans. Others became hunters. Among the most successful predators of this era were the members of a group called hyaenodonts. They were among the earliest large mammalian carnivores. And for tens of millions of years, they dominated the planet. They spread across Africa, Europe, Asia, and North America. They filled almost every predator role imaginable. Some species were small, around the size of a fox. Others became enormous, with massive skulls, powerful jaws, and bodies designed to kill. During the Eocene and Oligocene periods, roughly 45 to 25 million years ago, hyaenodonts were among the most successful meat-eating mammals on Earth. But they were not cats. They were not dogs. They followed a completely different evolutionary path. Modern predators belong to the order Carnivora. This includes lions, wolves, bears, and many other animals. Hyaenodonts belong somewhere else entirely. Their relationship with modern carnivores is distant. Some researchers have even suggested that their closest living relatives may be surprisingly different animals, such as pangolins, meaning that when you look at a hyaenodont, you are not looking at an ancient lion. You are looking at a predator from a forgotten branch of life, a branch that disappeared completely. For millions of years, hyaenodonts were incredibly successful, but the world around them was changing. By the time Simbakubwa existed, the golden age of hyaenodonts was already coming to an end. The planet had entered the Miocene, a time when modern ecosystems were beginning to take shape. New herbivores appeared, forests changed, grasslands expanded, and new predators began rising. The ancestors of wolves, the ancestors of bears, the ancestors of cats. The future belonged to a different kind of hunter. But the hyaenodonts were not finished yet. In Africa, one final group would rise, a group that pushed their evolution to the extreme, the giant African hyaenodonts. For these predators, evolution chose one strategy: become larger, become stronger, become unstoppable. And Simbakubwa was one of the greatest examples. But there is a problem. How large was it really? For years, headlines claimed something incredible. A predator weighing up to 1,500 kilograms, if true. Simbakubwa would have been the largest land mammalian carnivore ever known. Larger than any tiger, larger than any lion, even larger than a polar bear. A monster that would have dominated every landscape it entered. But science tells a more complicated story. The reason for that enormous estimate came from its teeth. Scientists measured the size of its molars. Then they compared those measurements with modern carnivores, especially cats. The problem? Hyaenodonts were not cats. Their bodies were built differently. Modern cats are designed for speed and agility. Their skulls are relatively small compared with their body size. But hyaenodonts invested heavily in their heads. Huge jaws, thick skulls, massive teeth. They were built like living crushing machines. So when scientists use a cat-based model to estimate their weight, the result may become exaggerated. A giant head does not always mean a giant body. Other estimates produced much smaller numbers. Some calculations suggested Simbakubwa may have weighed around 280 kilograms. Still enormous, comparable to an exceptionally large tiger. And even at that size, it would have been one of the most powerful predators of its time. But the mystery remained, because the fossils were incomplete, and estimating extinct animals from fragments is always difficult. But even if Simbakubwa was not a 1,500 kilogram monster, it was still not the largest member of its family, because deep in the fossil record, another predator was waiting, a creature even more extreme. Its name was Megastotherium osteoclasts, the bone-crushing giant. Unlike Simbakubwa, scientists discovered more than just fragments of this animal. They found parts of its skeleton, including its legs. And when scientists estimate the size of an extinct animal, leg bones often tell a more reliable story than teeth, because legs have one simple job. They must support the entire body. They cannot become enormous just for hunting. They must match the real weight of the animal. Based on these remains, Megastotherium may have reached more than 3 meters in body length. Its weight may have approached half a ton. A predator as heavy as the largest bears. A hunter unlike anything alive in Africa today. Imagine standing on the African landscape during this time. The sun is disappearing behind the horizon. A group of ancient herbivores gathers near a river. They are alert, but not because they see danger. Because they feel it. Something is watching. Something powerful. From the trees emerges a massive shape. It does not chase like a wolf. It does not leap like a cat. It does not rely on speed. It relies on overwhelming force. A single bite, a single attack, could decide everything. The skull of a giant hyaenodont was a masterpiece of brutal evolution. Their jaws were enormous. Their teeth were designed for slicing and crushing. The powerful muscles attached to their skulls gave them incredible strength. They were not simply predators that killed. They were predators designed to process almost every part of a carcass, even bones, in a world where survival depended on extracting every bit of energy from a meal. A crushing bite was an enormous advantage. But evolution does not reward the strongest creature forever. It rewards the creature that survives change. And the world was changing faster than the hyaenodonts could adapt. For millions of years, hyaenodonts had controlled the role of major mammalian predators. But during the Miocene, a new group was rising. The modern carnivores. Early cats, early dogs, early bears. They were not necessarily stronger. They were not necessarily better hunters. But they had different advantages. Some were faster. Some were more adaptable. Some could survive on a wider range of food. And slowly, the balance of power began shifting. For a long time, scientists believed the story was simple. Modern carnivores appeared, and they defeated the hyaenodonts. But nature rarely works like a battlefield. One species does not always replace another through direct competition. Sometimes an entire world changes. The climate shifts. The landscape transforms. The prey animals disappear. And the creatures that depend on the old world disappear with them. The Miocene was a period of enormous environmental change. Over tens of millions of years after the dinosaurs disappeared, Earth's climate had gradually cooled. Forests declined in many regions. Grasslands expanded. New ecosystems emerged. And these new environments favored different kinds of hunters. Animals that could travel farther. Animals that could adapt faster. Animals that required less energy to survive. This was the challenge facing the giant hyaenodonts. Their enormous size was both their greatest weapon and their greatest weakness. A huge body gave them power, but it also demanded enormous amounts of food. A smaller predator could survive when prey became scarce. A giant predator could not. The same trait that made them terrifying eventually made them vulnerable. But before they disappeared, the African hyaenodonts experienced one final golden age. They were not simply declining animals waiting for extinction. They were still evolving, still spreading, still dominating. One of their most successful relatives was Hyaenolorus sulzeri, the Sulzer's hyaenodont. This species is one of the best studied giant hyaenodonts. Its fossils have been discovered across a huge area, not only in Africa, but also in Europe and Asia, from Namibia to France. This tells us something extraordinary. These predators were not trapped on one continent. They were powerful enough to expand across the ancient world. At a time when many earlier hyaenodont lineages were disappearing, the giant African relatives were moving outward. They were reclaiming territory. For a moment, it seemed like the old predators had found a way to survive. The giants of Africa had returned, but the world they returned to was different. The rules were changing. Around 9 million years ago, the last giant African hyaenodonts vanished. The exact reason remains uncertain. Perhaps climate change reduced their prey. Perhaps changing ecosystems favored smaller, more flexible predators. Perhaps several pressures combined over thousands of generations. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. A dynasty that had lasted for tens of millions of years came to an end. The strange thing about extinction is this: the greatest creatures often disappear without anyone noticing. There was no final battle, no dramatic moment recorded in history. The last giant hyaenodont probably did not know it was the last. It simply lived. It hunted, it searched for food, until one day there were no more descendants. After their disappearance, a new generation of predators inherited the world. Cats, dogs, bears. They would eventually produce some of the most famous hunters Earth has ever known. The lion, the tiger, the wolf. But beneath their footsteps, buried deep beneath the soil of Africa, were the remains of another world. A world where giant hyaenodonts ruled. Today, when we imagine Africa's greatest predators, we think of lions. Their golden mane, their powerful roar, their place at the top of the food chain. But millions of years before lions existed, another predator walked across this land. It had no roar, no fame, no living descendants, only bones hidden underground. Simbakubwa was not the largest predator Earth ever created. It was not a 150 kilogram monster. It was something more interesting. It was a reminder that evolution does not follow a straight line. Nature has created countless experiments. Some succeeded for millions of years. Some disappeared forever. The hyaenodonts were one of those experiments. A completely different vision of what a predator could become. They built enormous jaws. They grew powerful bodies. They conquered continents. For millions of years, they were the hunters that other animals feared. And then, the world changed. The forests changed, the climate changed, new predators appeared, and the giants slowly disappeared. But their story is not a story about failure. Because for tens of millions of years, they were successful. They shaped ecosystems. They controlled landscapes. They were among the most powerful mammals ever to walk on Earth. Their extinction does not erase their dominance. It proves something even more fascinating. Every creature is temporary. Every ruler eventually loses its throne. Millions of years ago, before humans, before civilizations, before our own species ever existed, a giant predator crossed the African landscape. A creature with a skull built like a weapon. A creature that belonged to a world we will never see. Today, only fragments remain. A jaw, a tooth, a piece of bone buried beneath ancient rock. But those fragments whisper a message from the deep past. The Earth has been ruled by many. Not just by us, not just by the animals we know, but by countless forgotten giants that rose and vanished, because long before our story began, there were already worlds before us. This was before us.